Hello, and welcome to episode 12 of Track Records, where we discuss all things music. We do not discuss relay races. If you're looking for conversation about Usain Bolt or Carl Lewis, you've come to the wrong place. If you're looking for conversation about great records, concerts, that sort of thing, you've come to the exact right place. And I'm your host, Kenny, with my lovely co host, Barry. And Barry, I've got a question for you. You have a massive record collection, and you're living a life.
Hang on a second. I have
Yes.
to just say, um, Carl Lewis's early stuff is actually really good.
Okay.
His
Yes.
early records are really good.
Yes. If you ever seen Carl Lewis sing the national anthem, it is one of the most painful things you can ever see in your life. That is worth Googling. So check that out on YouTube.
Okay,
Um,
sorry, back
no,
to you.
that is fun. So as I was saying, you have a massive record collection and you live a life of leisure these days where you can just do as you please. And so you often spend much of your day listening to music. What, why do you pick the record you pick? Like what suddenly gets you to listen to this record versus that record? Is it seeing the record as you walk by your collection? Is it reading something? Is what inspires you to listen to what you choose to listen to?
Interesting question. Um, so it's twofold, really, or three or fourfold. Um, a lot of it has to do with new arrivals, meaning you go into a record store and there's a new arrivals section. That
Yes.
section is records they've just purchased that are up for sale. So they're in a section specifically for those. I have a new arrival section myself.
Got
So
it.
these are records that I've recently picked up, and those are typically at the top of my listening list. So I don't buy a record and then just file it away. I Everything that I pick up, I listen to and listen to repeatedly. So that's a big factor in what I'm listening to. However, I've always got probably, I don't know, in my main listening room, probably 50 to 100 records that aren't new arrivals that are in current rotation. And there's really no rhyme nor reason to it. It includes records from all the genres I like, whether it's jazz or soundtracks or soul, funk, um, even old school country, rock, of course. Um, I just always, it really is as simple as like you had mentioned. I will be digging through the collection, either filing away records um, or looking for things that may strike my fancy. And a lot of times it's just random. It's like, oh God, you know, I haven't listened to this record by Beaver and Krause for years. Since I bought it. Beaver and Krause being this experimental electronic duo from the Bay Area in the 1960s, late 60s. Um, and if sometimes it'll be like. Um, it's been so long since I've listened to this, and I probably only listened to it a couple times when I first bought it. It's kind of like listening to it again for the first time because as I get older, my music tastes change, of course. I think, we all go through that, obviously, all music fans. So hopefully that answers your question, but that's basically it.
And
There's nothing scientific about it.
that's the difference, once again, as I keep mentioning, between your listening to vinyl and my listening to streaming, because you can get visually inspired. You've got those 50 to 100 records in the current rotation room, and you see it and you're like, oh yeah, I haven't listened to this in a while, I want to check this out. And for me, I don't have that. I don't have something visual. And so it's got to be, something has to pop into my head, or I'm reading something, or I'm seeing a movie that, that sparks me to do that. And so and like I keep talking about the advantages and disadvantages of vinyl versus streaming. And that's definitely advantage of vinyl, I think, because again, it's that visual, you know, which,
Uh-huh.
which I miss.
And the things you mentioned also come into play for me too. It's really random, but a lot of times it will be like, say you're reading, I don't know, Neil Young's autobiography. Um, I get so into everything Neil that while the 2 weeks it takes me to read that book or however long, oftentimes that's all I'll be listening to because it's a great companion piece to reading the biography, the autobiography. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So when you say a movie or reading something, reading an article in a magazine or something, that will that will bring up stuff for me to go digging for because I want to listen to it for
And
whatever reason.
and have you ever been in the middle of that sort of situation and realized, oh, I don't have this particular record, and you've gone out purposely?
Yes, and I've gone out and sought it out and
Yeah.
picked it up. Yes, that happens a lot too. Um, all the time, in fact, when you become such an obsessive completist when it comes to collecting something like records, that plays into it a lot.
Because I could definitely see that where like you're using Neil Young for example, and you're reading about some like side project he did or whatever, or and you're like, oh wait, I don't have that. I'm like, okay, I need that, and and then
Perfect example is the other night I was watching on Amazon Prime. There's a pretty cool Neil Young documentary. It's called I think it's just called Neil Young 1965 to 75. So it's his golden period. And in it they were talking about the band that became Crazy Horse. It was this band called the Rockets.
Rockets, yeah.
It's sort of a middling rock band. It included the bass player, drummer, and guitarist who ended up becoming Crazy Horse, which ended up becoming Neil's backing band for, what, 50 years at this point. And they started backing him on that record. Everybody knows This Is Nowhere. Anyway, my point being is that I have that record by the Rockets. And so it spurred me on to go dig out that record and listen to it again,
Yeah.
simply because it came up in part of that movie.
Yeah, no, and I would I'm the very much the same way. Last night I was watching, I was looking for something to watch on TV, and I was right about to turn on to put on a movie, and then as I was looking though, The Last Waltz popped up, and I was like, oh, sorry, gotta watch this. And just even though I've seen it, I don't know, 20 times, maybe more,
I,
I
I
just
would have guessed about 1,000 times for you.
yeah, I really it might be 50 times. I mean, it's just I know every single line that even everyone says. But even I had to watch that instead, and got through about two-thirds of it before it just got too late and I went to bed. But very enjoyable seeing it every single time. And I wouldn't even say I get something new out of it, which would be great if I did, but I don't. It's the same thing, but it's still just wonderful. And it's so enjoyable, and it's just sort of like a high, like a non-drug induced high that I get.
Okay, so that leads me to another topic I wanted to bring up. That's a nice segue into it. But first, I wanted to ask you, before we go to that, what is your favorite performance in The Last Waltz?
It's
Since
very
you are a de facto expert on The Last Waltz, I want to hear what your favorite is.
yes. Well, my least favorite, I'll just this easy. That's Neil Diamond. I'm not a huge Neil Diamond fan to begin with, and I particularly don't like Dry Your Eyes. As far as my favorite goes, it's very tough. I really like the Staples doing The Wait. And The Wait is not one of my favorite band songs. It's a good song, but I'm just tired of it. But when the Staples do it with the band, it's so fantastic.
Pretty cool.
Van Morrison doing Caravan is just fantastic. I mean, you got to love Van Morrison just from seeing that. And then finally, Ronnie Hawkins doing "Who Do You Love" with the band, and as he begins by yelling to Bill Graham off stage, "Hey, look at me, Bill! Big time, Bill!" And then he also incorporates the band members' names into the song. As he's talking to Robbie and Ricky and Garth and so forth. And so it's you even if you don't know the history of Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks as they were known back then when they backed him before they backed Dylan, you could just see the intimacy, and it's a very nice feeling.
So you gave me several. I didn't hear a definitive. What's your favorite
I,
from the movie? Or did you say give me one
I,
that was
I would say the Staples,
absolutely
the Staples,
okay?
because
Okay.
between her voice singing Mavis Staples and then her dad Pop Staples, I mean they
Yeah.
both have such great voices and they're both so different that it
Hmm.
really it's wonderful. And when it's very sad what happened with the band between Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson and their long feud as the band broke up. But because when you listen to their songs, Robbie Robertson I, I know he gets a lot of credit, but he's still, even with all the credit he's gotten, he's still got to be one of the most underrated songwriters ever. I mean, the stuff that he writes about, who writes about the Civil War? Like, and makes it a hit song. I mean, it's
Yeah,
unbelievable.
in the confines of pop music in the late 60s, early 70s,
Yeah,
a song about the Civil War becomes a huge it's a rock staple at
yeah,
this point.
absolutely.
It's a
Yeah.
rock classic, and a lot of his songs were, um, which, you mentioned how brilliant of a songwriter he was, but he was also a brilliant guitarist.
Yeah.
His guitar playing is phenomenal, in my
Uh,
opinion. Like, he's one of my favorite rock guitarists, I would have to say.
and as you see, and so going back to Last Waltz, when Eric Clapton is playing with the band, and he and Eric are sort of dueling back and forth, and Eric Clapton can blow most guys off the stage, and yet you can see Robbie can totally hold his own, and it's really impressive. And by the way, for our audience up there, if you don't know that the Civil War inspired song was "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down," you're probably listening to the wrong podcast.
and and you're quickly switching over to another so-called podcast right now as well.
Yes, and as a
So
matter of fact,
now we're down to 5 viewers, Ken.
yes. If you know, by the way, where track records, where our name comes from, please show off your smarts by emailing the podcast and letting us know.
Yeah, and our 6 listeners do know that.
Yes,
That's why they keep hanging with us, because they're like-minded, I think.
I hope so. So the topic that you were going to talk about.
Oh, so piggybacking on what you were talking about, how you just, you've seen the Last Waltz a million times, but you get such enjoyment out of it that you will watch it again if you happen to surf by it. Um, so which I've been pondering this lately, and really it's all about, like, you, myself, most of our close friends, as we've touched on in past episodes. Um, why is music so fucking important to us and so all consuming? Um, from a very young age, I'm just trying to figure it out. Like, is it simply because of when we grew up? So say when we were coming of age in when we're 10, 12 years old in the 70s, um, pop music was pretty ubiquitous, right? It was so culturally important to that era. So I'm talking, like, say whenever rock music became the dominant popular music. And so we're of that age where it was it was in our lives, whether it was radio, whether it was like your older siblings who had records that you were glomming onto, um, whatever it was. For some reason, it just became stamped onto our existence. And I'm not sure exactly why that is. Is it simply because of the timing, or is it because music is such an essential part of the human experience, and that played into it as well? So it was like just the this perfect timing of these things happening to us at a very impressionable age. And it's really never, the grasp it's had on us has never really dissipated, at least for me. And for example, almost all my long-term friends um, were really into music, are really into music. Probably 2/3 of them became musicians. They were so into music, including myself, that we somehow figured out how to play music. We're in bands, creating, writing songs, writing music, playing music, recording records, what have you. Um, and is it simply, it's just like, oh, well, shit, it's something to do. It's like, oh, I like soccer, so I'm going to go play soccer. What is it?
And obviously there's not one simple answer. I do think, and by the way, even though I was never musically gifted enough or cared enough to practice enough to learn an instrument, I definitely, like, I wrote, I don't know, 1,000 songs. I just page after page of songs I would write. And my sister even went,
Lyrics.
Lyrics, yeah,
Yeah.
because my sister was a singer songwriter, and she actually even went and recorded one of my songs, which someday I'll get it out to you, called "Direct to the Sun."
Uh-huh. I
But
did not know that.
yes, so and she was great. She was really good. Um, so I really do think radio was a huge part of it, and I also think lack of competing entertainment. Okay, so as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, certainly as a 17 or 18-year-old, I could go to concerts all the time. Okay, and there wasn't like, if I don't know what would happen if I was suddenly born today. I know I would still be a music fan, I'm sure, but I wouldn't be the same music fan. It wouldn't it because there's just too much else going on. There's too much, I mean, just the internet alone, never mind, video games and streaming TV and all sorts of stuff. Back then, like a band coming to town was such a huge deal, that like because that was the experience, like, and in sports, I guess, was the other competing thing. But I went to, for every sporting event I went to 50 concerts, that and so, and again, the radio, I think, was huge. And so if you suddenly were born today, or not born today, but suddenly a teenager today, if you're listening, you'd have to be listening to Spotify or Pandora or something along those lines, because radio, just what radio is left, just completely sucks and has sucked for quite a while. And just the question is, if you went to Pandora or Spotify, let's say you were starting ground zero, how would you even know what to listen to?
Yeah, I totally concur. And that's another thing I was thinking about. I was trying to draw parallels between back then when we were of age to, like you were talking about, if you came of age today. And it's so fractured. And what I mean by that is, say in 1978, there was probably, a handful of radio stations that you were being exposed to in New England at that time. And there wasn't 4,000 streaming stations, 4,000 cable channels. If you wanted to see live rock music on TV, it was pretty much the midnight special or Don Kirshner's rock concert for the most part. So those things, much like you'll hear people talk about TV being so communal back then, like, oh, the last episode of MASH had like 14 million viewers or whatever. It's simply because the choices were so much smaller, and therefore it was more. I can't really articulate what I'm trying to say. It was so present in everybody's life, not just a handful of people. Whereas now, man, is there anything that compares to that? Maybe something really lame like, I don't know, American Idol, um, which has the same sort of reach, but just completely lame.
Right.
I, there's it's
you know and I do think radio made such a difference, because when you alluded to the radio station in Boston when I was growing up, the best one and is the historically well-known WBCN, which there's even a documentary on that radio station, which is worth checking out. But I actually volunteered to go and answer phones on Saturday mornings during the winter in Boston, when I take the T, the public transit down there at 6 in the morning on a winter Saturday morning. That's how much I cared about being there.
Yeah.
And again, radio was just huge. I spent more time listening to radio than watching TV by far.
Mhm.
And nowadays, you'd never meet someone who listens to the radio more than they watch TV.
Well, not
Because
that type of radio, that's for sure. I guess streaming radio or whatever, but the model has changed so much.
yes,
And because there was, this one radio station that you're referring to, pro- I can only imagine most of your peers were listening to it and being influenced
yeah.
as well. So the bands and the music they were playing, those became your bands, so to speak.
And even when you talk about your music taste changing now as you've gotten older, I also went through the various radio stations. So there's the radio station I was listening to when I was 12, and then by the time I was 14, that radio station was way too lame, and I'd moved on to the next one. And so but then by the time I was 16, then I was listening to BCN, and that was it from then on. But it's interesting also, the first radio station I used to listen to was WRKO, and it was an AM station.
Hmm.
And again, that shows you how old I am, you know. But I think, but you also talked about the grasp music has on us, and I think, yeah, once it was imprinted into us at that point, it was just never going to go away. You know, I think about like how it would be if you were deaf or if you were blind, and you know, and it'd be a horrible choice, but it'd be an easy choice for certain people to make, and I don't know, you know, I couldn't imagine not being able to listen to music. Uh, and I don't listen to
Life,
it still
life
nearly
would
as much as you do. So,
life would not be nearly as rich for myself and most of my peers. Um, I think the method of delivery, as well as radio, I think the method of delivery has made it somewhat more disposable these days. And what I mean by that is back when you had to buy, if you wanted to hear, every song by, I don't know, Aerosmith on their latest record, Rocks, just using that as an example, you'd have to go out and buy the record, which took some effort, took some money. You would have to have a stereo to play it on, which also took money and effort. And therefore, it drew you in because you were investing so much more into it than, say, what people are doing today, where, let's just say mainstream, um, the mainstream digest or gets their music from streaming services, so much more disposable because they've got basically everything ever recorded at their fingertips, and it's not sitting down and listening to a whole record from start to finish. In fact, it's probably more often than not even listening to a whole song. It's like, oh, I'll check this out for 15 seconds next, 15 seconds next. Therefore it doesn't carry the same weight in lives that it did when we were growing up.
I think that's absolutely spot on. And as a matter of fact, even going like further, like as we've talked about going used record shopping before, when I would do that as a teenager, that was like treasure hunting. You know, that was a that
Yes.
that was I you know, you felt like a pirate, like you know, you felt like you were looking for buried treasure. And so that was a huge deal. And that was really, you know, part of my, you know, weekly existence. You know, Saturdays when we were out of school, Saturdays like was often spent, most of a Saturday would be spent trekking around Boston, you know, going from one used record store to another. And so that really, if you're going to make that sort of commitment, you know, that's because you care, and because you really, oh, I found a copy of the Who Odds and Sods, I've been looking for that forever.
With the
And
die cut cover.
yes, and that's like, oh, you know, and like to have that, to hold that, you know, that just meant a lot. And that's again where I keep talking about the difference between streaming and vinyl is without that, you don't have the same commitment. And it is more disposable. And as much as I really enjoy my access to it, you know, like I said, I miss that part of it. One of the cool things I can do though is I can tell the device, hey, play like 1963 Bob Dylan or play 1970s Bowie, and it'll really just like condense down and just play those songs, which I
Hmm.
really enjoy. So there's so many things I enjoy about it, and yet again,
Hmm.
I almost feel guilty that I don't have that it's not the vinyl anymore because that's really being part of that club.
Yeah. So you're feeling somewhat uh, less than worthy
Yes,
because of that, because you don't buy vinyl anymore. I,
yes.
it's funny.
I,
And I know we've talked about this before. I could give a shit how anybody listens to music. I just think it's an interesting thing to discuss and compare and contrast how things have changed in whatever 40, 50 years. Um, but there's no denying the fact that listening to it via physical, whether it's records or CDs or whatever, it is more of a commitment. And I somehow think that it gets cemented in our brains a little bit more and somehow becomes more important to us. Um, that said, I'm sometimes embarrassed by my devotion to it still. So many decades later, it's kind of embarrassing. And like, wow, am I just suffering from this massive stunted growth?
you know, I mean, back when I was a teenager, like I couldn't do homework without having a record play. I couldn't go to sleep
Hmm.
without having a record play. You know, I mean, like
Yes.
it was, you know, and again, when there's a concert coming, like it was like waiting for the Super Bowl. I was so excited, like 4 more days. I can't stand it. 3 more days, 2 more days. Oh, it's finally here. And as you and I know, back then you weren't like taking out your smartphone and trying to video the concert. You were enjoying the concert. And I definitely miss those audiences, because it's definitely a different, far different story today. But yeah, if like my turntable had broken or the needle snapped or whatever, I had to go out and like get that fixed ASAP, because I couldn't live without it. But again, that was there was no, not only was, especially like early 70s, mid 70s, there not only was there no internet, there wasn't even cable TV. And I remember when we first got cable, and we got it early in my house, and it was HBO, and they only had like a handful of movies. I watched like Apocalypse Now like 100 times because it was like one of the 3 or 4 movies they played, and that,
Mm-hmm.
and and again, video games were Pong, and so that was not, it was not like, do I listen to a record or play Pong? It was, no, I'm going to listen to records. And then when things became more portable, like with boom boxes and Walkmans, like, oh man, I can listen to music and still like go to the record store or go to the park, or go whatever. That made it even better. Then I was certainly, going to be listening to music all the time. It's interesting, if they hadn't invented the Walkman, you know, it, I, I wonder if that would have lessened my devotion to music. Not entirely by any means, but a little bit, because if I couldn't go, and listen to music at the same time, it's sort
What
of
it did,
it's sort of like staying at home because you have a land, you're expecting a phone call and you have a landline. You don't have a cell phone, so you've got to like just stay there.
stay by the phone.
Yeah,
What it did do is it fed your addiction even more.
yeah,
And I'm right in the same boat. I know we talked about it, but I from those years, I wouldn't be out in public for the most part, um, without my Walkman with me. Um, but yeah, it allowed you to take music with you, and if you were a fanatic like you were, then it made it easier. It's almost like having a good drug dealer on your block. Just made it more convenient, and you
yeah.
just indulged in it more and more. But I would argue that music is a healthy thing. There's been lots of studies done and around the uh, the beneficial health aspects of music. Like oftentimes people are suffering from dementia or other mental issues. Um, there's been tons of studies done where they will play music for these folks, and they always show improvement when they're listening to music as opposed to not being exposed to music. So there is a healing factor to it as well. I think I'm assuming so. It just always makes me feel better. It makes my head feel better by
And,
being able to indulge in it.
and it's amazing the impact music has, because if I mention a movie, there are certain movies, if I mention, the first thing you think about is the music. If I mention Jaws, the first thing that comes to your mind is the Jaws theme. If I mention Rocky, if I
Mm-hmm.
mention Star Wars, it's the music that really carries those movies, and that's true of like a million other movies as well. And if and music just creates, it invokes a certain mood, in different music, different types of moods. But it's amazing how it does that in the way that a lot of things don't. Art does. Like when I'm at the art museum, I can definitely, that'll invoke certain moods, and that has a similar thing. And that's one of the few places I don't want to listen to music. First of all, it's rude, but second of all, I want to just really be into the art. Um, but when I'm listening to music, there are times I'm listening to music when I'm reading. Then there are times I'm listening to music, I just want to hear the music.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want anything else distracting me. So
So I guess if we just focus on today, like is it just simply it embellishes the the human experience,
yeah,
or it enhances, not embellishes, it enhances being a human, by impacting and affecting your emotional state and your, like you said, your mood.
yeah.
um
And you
I mean,
mentioned
is that it? I mean, and how does it differ,
you meant
from some of these other things we're talking about?
you mentioned like having a drug dealer on your block earlier. It's the same. Like I can do with music what I did once upon a time with drugs, which is like if I want to like just be up, like I'll like blast like Springsteen's out in out in the streets, and that'll just get me going. Okay, like or Street Fighting Man by the Stones, or there's certain Bob O'Reilly by the Who. Certain music will just get me off my feet when I need that pickup.
Mhm.
That like cocaine did like 30 years ago. It does that. And as we've discussed before, there are times where you want to be not necessarily like sad, but you're more in a somber mood, and you want music that reflects that. We talked about Joy Division for that before, and for me, certain Jefferson Airplane, Moody Blues songs are like that, or even James Taylor. Like there, I can definitely be in my singer songwriter mood, or I can be in my Clash mood, where I just want to like just get fired up. The judge says 5 to 10. Well, I say double that again. I'm not working for the clamp down. um and certainly back in the day when I had office jobs, like listening to something like that really helped
Get through
keep
the
me from
day.
going postal. Yeah, exactly.
That
um
that was school. That was like junior high and high
yeah,
school for me for sure. Again, going back to the advent of the Walkman, being super sly about like having to turn the headphones around on the back of my head so the teacher couldn't see that I was
right.
wearing them,
Yeah,
and just totally zoning out on whatever boring topic was being regurgitated by my Western Civ teacher. Um, just totally checked out. And engaging in the music. So I guess it's not surprising that it's still important to us in this, this stage of life, and maybe even more so for me anyway. I can't speak for you, but I'd be curious to see if, I'd be curious to hear if it's more important to you now or less important, or if it's the same.
it,
How would you compare it?
it's I hate to use the term less important, but it is, my life is more fractured. I do spend time watching, streaming, TV, movies, sports. I'm a huge
Every
sports
Boston
fan.
sports
Yeah,
game
yeah. So
ever.
so so I'm really busy. That takes up a lot of time. And I don't like watching taped. I really like watching live, and so that takes a lot of time. And then unlike you, I actually have a job, and so that takes up a lot of time too. In terms of I can't be listening to music when I'm training dogs. And so
I just got to add a side note.
yeah,
For anyone watching, Ken has a this is how into sports he is. He has his TV viewing room with three TVs, and at one time he'll have the Celtics playoff game, the Bruins playoff game, and then, game 12 of the Red Sox season, all going at the same time. And I have photographic evidence of it. It's pretty hilarious. I love your extremist nature about
and,
that.
and obviously you can't do that with music. You can't have three different albums playing at the same time.
Uh, I, 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 I have to say, the Flaming Lips put out a record called Zyreka that is four separate LPs with certain instruments on each LP, and it's made to be played on four separate stereos at the same time, so that you get the full sound, the
And have you
full.
listened? Have you done that?
I have the set, the four LP set, but I've never done it. And I could do it in my house, but I'd need three other people starting it on a
Right.
different system at the
Yeah.
same time. So I have not done it, but
That
I'm
is a
sure I
great
will
way to
before I
meet your
croak.
neighbors. Invite your neighbors over. Say now when I say go,
It'd be like, God, what?
this guy's
We
insane.
heard you were into records,
Yeah.
but Jesus, this is just a
But
tad extreme.
I do love that concept. I did not know that, and that is really interesting. I like it when bands do quirky stuff like that. Like Lamb Chop released two records, I think, at the same time, or one, or back to back. One was called "Come On," and the other one was called "No, You Come On." and I and I just found that amusing. So I love what the Flaming Lips doing like that. Um, but let's okay. I will backtrack on my statement. I'll say most albums you could not play at the same time as another album. Yeah, again,
Yes,
as
that is
opposed to
true.
sports. And I would never like watch sports and have the sound off and listen to music while I'm watching sports. I can't do that. If I'm watching sports, I'm watching sports. And so and it so that's really, I'm more of a sports fan now than I was when as a teenager. And probably, again, I don't want to say less of a music fan. That's not the right way to say it, but I don't listen to music as much.
So it sounds like life has gotten in the way.
Yeah,
Um, to simplify, meaning, you have to worry about a job and keeping a roof over your head, and you're not just squirreled away in your bedroom ignoring the world while you're listening to your sister's Joni Mitchell records,
right.
whereas you don't have as many concerns um, at that age as you do now. Dogs, house,
Yeah,
job, keeping food on the table, all the boring shit that comes with being an adult.
exactly. My concern back then was definitely how do I get the next Springsteen album? How do I get tickets to the Pretenders concert? That was my sole focus. You know, how do I get some weed? Um, but yeah, and it's just different now. And so, but like I said, I would never use the term I'm less of a music fan. And certainly, when Kim and I were together, we went to as many shows as I did when I was a teenager or when I was in my 20s. Because at one point we were probably going to 3 shows a week because she was that much into music as I was.
Yeah, I've never seen such a well-matched couple in that respect or that regard. Like, out of all my music fanatic friends, I think you're the only one who ended up with a wife who was just as much of a music fan as they were or you were. That seems pretty rare. And
I
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't have any other friends like that. And
Mhm.
when South by Southwest would come to town, she and I would divide things up alphabetically. I'd do like A to F, and she would do G to Z, and